I think there's two different models of how people learn information. One is how the traditional school system works. I call it the just in case model, right? Just in case you're going to become a rocket scientist when you're older, you need to memorize the quadratic equation and like all this stuff now. Just in case you become a marine biologist, you need to know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. The problem is that's not at all how humans learn. It's not how we as adults learn. The just in case model is this artificial experiment in the modern schooling environment.
Welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. I am your sometimes host, Isaac Morehouse. I'm here today with someone I envy. I don't envy very many people, but when I look at all the things that Connor Boyack has his finger in, every single one of them, I'm like, ooh, yeah, I've always wanted to do that too, and that, and that. But I always have to choose one thing. Somehow he's able to do all of them. So a man of many talents, Connor Boyack, welcome to the podcast.
You're very flattering. And I think at the end of the day, it's just, I don't get enough sleep. I need to, but it's a labor of love and I love it. And it's the whole adage, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So I'm excited that we can serve so many families. And I hope today in this conversation, we can serve the families listening as well.
Yeah. And so just to give a little bit more background for those of you listening, if you're not familiar with Connor, he has written 50 or more books, somewhere in that range, many bestsellers, produces a TV show, has many businesses that he has either started or is helping to run under the umbrella. He has a whole network, the Libertas Network, which has some nonprofits, some businesses, spans the range of different types of organizations. So very much focused on, I would say, this podcast is about opening up education. Connor, your work is kind of about opening up everything. Like, let's open everything. Let's make it easier for people to start businesses, easier for people to have alternative approaches to education, easier for people to make more choices, have more freedom and responsibility. And you're kind of involved in that on many levels. Is that a fair characterization?
I think I'm going to put that on the business card now. I think that's a great way to capture it. And if I were to distill it down, it's opening minds. It's getting people to consider things they haven't considered before. It's breaking people free of the conveyor belts that they've been trapped on their whole life, the traditions of their fathers and grandfathers, and this is what we've always done. So just getting people to, sure, have more choice, more option, but also kind of shaking them by the shoulders a little bit to say like, hey, pay attention. There's other stuff going on that you can consider. Because the reality, like with education, there are a ton of options, but so many parents have these blinders on or whatever, where it's just like, well, of course I'm going to do this with my kids because it's what I did. And so I see a lot of our work is not only to help support these different options, but then get parents, get people to realize, oh my gosh, it's a new world. Look at all the abundant opportunities there are. Let me now step out with a little bit more confidence and courage to go in a different direction than what I may have experienced when I was a student.
It's funny. It's easier for people to hear that kind of message about questioning the sort of things you've inherited, the assumptions that your culture has about how you should do things. And for people to think that that is like an anti-tradition message or something like that. And I think what's really important, and I see this come through in your work all the time too, it's not even about whether or not you buck every trend or norm. It's about knowing why you're doing what you're doing. My wife and I often talk, we've lived in way too many places, 5 states, 10 different houses over the course of our 21-year marriage. And the difference in certain places we've lived where people you meet are much more intentional. Like whatever choice they're making, maybe they started a business, maybe they work at a big corporation, maybe their kids go to a school, maybe they homeschool, but they're doing it for a reason. They know why. They've thought through the costs and benefits and said, yes, I want to choose this. Given my own goals, I think this is the best way to get there, versus places where people are not intentional at all. They're just kind of going along and they're not even asking questions or considering the possibility that something could be different. G.K. Chesterton has this great little parable of a fence. You come across a fence in the middle of nowhere and you're like, why is this fence here? It makes no sense. Don't just tear it down. First, figure out why it was put there. It might be there for a good reason. Those norms and traditions might actually be serving a purpose, but maybe not. So find out why it's there and then decide, do we still need it or do we not need it? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no. But it's really about knowing like that you are doing it for a reason.
I think that's right. You'll remember this, Isaac. You contributed a chapter to the book we did a few years ago, Skip College. And though provocatively titled, most people assume, judging the book by its cover that, Connor and all these co-authors, they are anti-college and they want everyone to stop going to college. Sure, it's provocatively titled. That in part is how you help sell books. But the thesis of the book was never to say college is inherently bad. It was to do precisely what you're saying. Let's be intentional, because if you're intentional about going to college, there are often much better, cheaper, and faster ways to get that degree, to create the signal amongst the noise. Or it may be that that's not your path and you need to go to Praxis, which you started and we're now working on, or a trade school or some other model, right? Intentionality, I love that you chose that word, because I feel like that is when we open parents' minds and they see the choices, then they can now say, okay, I'm now going to be much more deliberate or intentional about what I'm doing. What I don't want for parents to do is just to be caught in a trap or the conveyor belt, or this is just what's always been done to their environment, and not taking into consideration, hey, things are a little bit different than 30 years ago when you went through the school system. So maybe you want to weigh those factors and variables into your decision. If at the end of the day, you're going to put your kids in that same system, great, but do it with eyes wide open, because when you do, you might make some different decisions along the way, or supplement at home with a tutor, or do halftime in the school, halftime homeschool. You might do something else, but your word that you chose is the word that I often use with parents: intentionality. It's not that any particular route or process is bad. You have to be intentional about what you're doing so that you know the cost benefit analysis. And often, if you're intentional, you can accelerate through these systems. You can get your degree much faster than, don't just go through the motions, right? If you're intentional and serious about it, there are going to be better pathways for you to accomplish your goal than going through just the traditional process that everyone else does.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah, it's really opening the eyes to see the possibility that already exists. But before, we have so many directions things I want to jump into that are kind of scattered all over the place. But I have to ask you first about one of your best titles as an outlaw beekeeper. What does that mean, that you are an outlaw beekeeper?
So I have been a beekeeper for like 10 years. I live in the beehive state, the old school beehive. If you remember, like Winnie the Pooh and Disney, it's kind of like the little flipped basket. That is called a skep. So what's funny about that is like a symbol in Utah for the state. That type of beehive is actually illegal to use in Utah. So the state symbol is illegal for beekeepers to actually use. Now, that's not why I'm an outlaw beekeeper. It's with good reason. They shouldn't need to ban it legally, but it's not a good way to do beekeeping. There are more modern, far better ways for the bees. The reason I'm an outlaw beekeeper is because in Utah, like in several other states, bees have communicable diseases, right? They'll travel for miles, and there's something called foul brood. And the origin, so the state law says that all beekeepers must register their beehives with the state. So that's why I'm an outlaw beekeeper, is the state has no, granted, on interviews like this, I'm openly broadcasting that I have bees, right? But technically I am non-compliant with the law. And the purpose behind the law is, if you remember during COVID, contact tracing, like when you would travel and they would want to know, where did you go and when did you come back? And the whole idea was, if he has COVID, we need to let everyone else on the plane know. Same thing with bees. If we find out that the bees have foul brood and here's where that beehive is, we can go within 5 miles and tell all the other beekeepers, hey, beware, you might want to treat your bees prophylactically. Anyways, so long story, but it's a fun little catchy thing where when I give people honey, I call it renegade honey, and it makes it taste a little bit better.
Oh, always. Yeah, it actually does tie into what we were just talking about as well, about questioning traditions, assumptions. That's one of the first stoppers a lot of people have when it comes to education in particular, or entrepreneurship. This sort of the myth of the rule of law, the idea that if there's a law written on the books, that it's a binary. You're either a criminal if you're violating it, or you're legally compliant. And of course, anyone who's ever had a tax return that's more complicated than just one person with one job knows it's literally, there is no such thing as a fully compliant human being. There is no way to not have something that you are doing in your business, in your tax return, in your education, technically not in violation of some state or federal law at any given time, depending upon how someone interprets it. And once you kind of understand that this is a range, you realize, can I do that? Is it legal? Is this like when you drive, do you always go literally exactly the speed limit? No, because you understand that like laws, interpretations, enforcement. My wife and I, as I said, we've lived many places. We don't, when we move to a new state, we don't usually stop to like look at the laws around homeschooling. We just start homeschooling. And then over time, you might run into some restriction or you're supposed to file something here or there and you kind of assess your risk. So like you're technically an illegal beekeeper. Maybe someone will come try to shut you down. Maybe they just starting with that, like even things like, oh, legal, licensure, whatever, it's not usually that black and white. It's often about a level of risk, a level of reasonability and understanding. Like when you send in your tax return, is it possible something on there is not correct? Yeah, nobody knows for sure until they decide to come after you. And then you got to try to defend it. But I think even that, like, relaxing a little bit our assumptions about what's possible. It's very easy for people. I know you run into this with entrepreneurship where someone says, I have this idea for a business, but I don't know how to like register as an LLC. So they stop. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, it's not necessarily the first thing you need to do. How about you go sell a product first and then you can kind of figure that out, right? Like this idea that like you need official permission and an official track that is like fully licensed and legal and all mapped out before you do something is kind of backwards. It's like, hey, let's see if there's a there first. And then let's figure out if we need to get more official.
Well, I see what you're saying as operating from first principles. I am a parent. My children are my children. I have the natural right and responsibility to not just raise, but also educate them. That is my burden and no one else's. And sure, I can hire other people, delegate to them to assist, right? But operating that way, thinking that way, that I am kind of a self-sovereign individual, that I have brought children into this world. They are my kind of duty and responsibility to care for. And yeah, we can homeschool or we can do whatever we want. Like I can put them in private school. You know, I've got choices, but they're my choices. And rather than, yes, asking for permission and saying, mother, may I, you're instead, as you said, you're flipping it. That is something that's very unconventional for a lot of people to think that way, especially those of us who graduated from what I like to call the public fool system, where it's kind of ingrained in you. You know, I mean, those schools operate effectively like prisons in many ways, where you can't even go to the bathroom without, you know, getting permission. And it creates a permissioned society where people are used to requesting, oh, I need licensure, I need this permit, I need the, you know, we launched our whole children's entrepreneur market program, which is going to help 100,000 kids launch a small business this year. It all started because there were these headlines around the country. I'm sure you remember them. They still happen, unfortunately, of little kids' lemonade stands getting shut down because they didn't have a business license or a food handler's permit. There was one story of a girl in Colorado. She was 4 years old. Her mom helped her set up a little lemonade stand on the, you know, they lived by like a trailway and there was a big like 5K run going by or something like that. And so they set up this little lemonade stand. The girl is 4 years old. Her name's Abigail, 50-cent cups of lemonade. And there was some county health department bureaucrat walking by because there were other vendors along the path of this race and saw this little girl's lemonade stand and said, oh, you actually need a food handler's permit. It's $80. I'll let you do the math of how many cups Abigail would have to have just to break even on the cost of the permit, let alone all of her supplies and hopefully a profit. It's insane. And so, you know, we ended up passing a law here in Utah. We've helped about a dozen other states now pass it since. We call it a lemonade stand law. And it says, look, if you're a kid, if you're a minor under the age of 18, you do not need any permit, any license. You don't collect and remit sales taxes, no, nothing. It's just a total free market for kids. Go have fun, go experiment, and then wait until you're 18 for the crushing weight of the state to come upon you with all these regulations and taxes. But in the meantime, go flex your muscles, go learn, go fail, go have fun. And our whole goal is exactly what you're talking about, Isaac. Sure, we want kids to make money. Sure, we want them to learn entrepreneurship. But I want them to learn that they can just do things. They can just like go create value. They can go start whatever they want. That is a spirit, a personality trait that I think will serve them and our society very well. But our educational systems often, not only are they not conducive to producing kids who think and operate that way, they're often counterproductive towards those ends. And so that in part is what we're trying to do with opening the education system, is say, what are we actually trying to educate kids to become? What is the end goal that we want? Is it a rules following, you know, non-critical thinking? Of course not. That's not what parents want for their kids. But then are we educating our children in a way that is conducive to the type of adults we want them to be? Again, intentionality. What is the end result that I'm going for? Let's not just go through the motions because that's what, you know, feels good right now. It's beginning with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says. What is the end result that I want for my child? Okay, let me operate now and educate my children now in a way that will produce that end result, hopefully.
So when I look at all the things you're involved in, I kind of look at, and I'm curious to to know from you if you went through a process of realization that led you to these, or if you've always had this sort of fully fledged vision, because I see kind of three separate prongs of the sort of Libertas network, or Connor Boyack Triton, I guess. You have, you're telling stories. So through the Tuttle Twins, and I think you have some other fiction as well, you're telling stories as a way to convey ideas, but not just like a nonfiction, let me get up and give you a speech about what I think. Genuine, interesting, entertaining, engaging stories. Then part two, so that's sort of like entertainment and storytelling. Part two is doing. Hey, I think there can be better approaches to things, so I'm going to offer them as a business. You have several things that fit into this bucket, your various entrepreneurial pushes, praxis, hey, here's an alternative to college. And then prong three is sort of a policy and advocacy thing. Hey, let's go remove these laws that are restricting lemonade stands, or let's do policy research, or try to help different, states, different lawmakers improve the legal framework. It's funny, with my own career, I have very similar motivations to you of just helping people expand their scope of freedom and intentionality. I started in politics, realized that wasn't where I wanted to be, moved into policy advocacy. Was like, okay, there's something here, but I want to be able to, instead of just trying to get laws changed, I want to directly offer people alternatives. So then I moved into entrepreneurship and started building businesses. And I've never done the storytelling component. I'm very, very motivated by it, but I just haven't done it. Did you have a process of realizing, hey, we need more than just policy or politics? We need to tell stories, or we need to actually build businesses? Or did you always have all three of these things going simultaneously? Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And this is a really fun question for me to answer. I fear that I do a lot of consultations with up and coming authors or nonprofit people, because they're like, wow, look at what you're doing, help advise me. And the problem that they often run into, I think we all have this problem, is they're comparing where they're currently at with where I'm currently at. And I have to tell them, when I started, there was no vision, the very limited vision that I had at the time. So I got my start in politics as well. I was on Mike Lee's first campaign in 2009 and 10, helped get him elected. I had very similar feelings. I'm like, I don't think my focus is politics, but I like policy. So I started Libertas Institute. At the time, it was just a state-based think tank in Utah. That was the tiny little vision. And then my kids were at the time very young. Once my boy was 5 years old, I found myself wanting to share with my kids what dad does as a freedom fighter, changing all these laws and helping all these people. Literally, I go on Amazon, I look for children's books that will help me teach about free markets and property rights and entrepreneurship. There's nothing.
You throw them a copy of The Wealth of Nations and it just doesn't connect.
Here's the creature from Jekyll Island. Good luck. And so there was nothing. That was the opportunity that prompted the Tuttle Twins. So I partnered with my buddy Elijah, who's our illustrator, and we launched the Tuttle Twins. Again, there was no vision at the time. We literally created one book, and we're like, we don't know if this will sell. There's nothing like this on the market at all. Maybe this will be a dud, but people liked it. They wanted more. So we did a second and a third. Now we got 3 dozen books under the Tuttle Twins brand for kids of all ages. We've sold 6 million copies. That then led to a cartoon series with Angel Studios that I never would have imagined, before.
It's a really good cartoon, by the way. I went and pulled it up, and I'm thinking, even though the books are amazing and I know you, I still have, my experience watching children's entertainment, they're usually not good. Right.
Oh,
and especially if it's one that's got a message, or it's trying to be wholesome, it's usually just how the quality is low. These are hilarious. These are great. Even as an adult, I found them so entertaining. So huge shout out for the cartoon.
You want to know why? So in the writer's room, when we're doing those episodes, it's me and Elijah, and our goal is to make sure that the ideas are taught well and communicated correctly. But all the rest of the writers, usually there's 3 or 4 other writers who are doing the script and the kind of the story and whatever, they're all comedians. Every single one of them is a comedian. And so they're finding, what are those jokes for kids that are silly and haha, but then what are those intellectual, adult level jokes? Because we want the whole family to watch. That's the goal. But the cartoon,
it's the level of Phineas and Ferb. That's probably the only other cartoon my kids would watch where I thought it was actually funny as an adult as well. This is a good
Back in the day, I would say The Simpsons, even though that's a little more crass, but it also had kind of the dual level of humor. Yep. And but the cartoon was not in the original vision. Or here we're doing all this think tank stuff, and we ended up passing our lemonade stand law that I mentioned, just because we were responding to that stupid headline, and going to bat for Abigail in Colorado. But then that prompted, hey, let's do a kids entrepreneur market just as a fun way to celebrate this new law. We did that. And then it was like, oh, let's do a lot more of these. We spent 5 years doing that in Utah, only in Utah. And then we're like, well, wait a minute, this isn't a Utah thing. Like, why don't we scale this nationally? So now it's a big national thing. Praxis, same thing. Tuttle Twins, kids markets, we're growing this national audience of kids, but all those kids are getting older. And then the parents are like, well, what should I do with, and then it's like, well, hey, let's talk to the Praxis folks, which led to the acquisition. So the message that I give when I do these consultations, or the message that I would give to your viewers and listeners, Isaac, is that for me, my vision, what we've built has always been incremental. It was just move forward. And then you kind of build the plane as it's flying in the air, right? And look, there are people out there who have their master strategic plan, who from day one can go execute and build exactly, like, more power to you. There's great people like that can do that. That's never been my experience. Frankly, I think that's not most people's experience. So to me, it's all about not just intentionality, but taking initiative, just starting. Don't feel like you need the master plan and the end vision to just get started, because what I've discovered is along the way, I figure out what is the adjacent possible. By that, I mean, hey, I'm doing really well here. And because I'm now doing well in this small little sphere, that's unlocked these 3 adjacent opportunities, that I can now explore. Same thing with homeschooling my kids, or we put them in an acting academy for a year. Every action we take with our kids for their education unlocks, oh, hey, here's this cool field trip opportunity. Here's this apprenticeship thing. Or, hey, we just met this other family. Let's have them over for dinner. And it just unlocks opportunity. You just got to start.
Man, it so resonates with me so much. I have met people who will have this massive life plan of, here's my 20-year multifaceted process of how I'm going to become, whatever. Often it's when I was working with college kids, it would be students who were like, I'm going to be Secretary of State someday, which terrified me. That's kind of felt like vaguely sociopathic behavior, but that's really, really the exception. I think for most people like me, what you said resonates so much. And I found for myself, instead of where am I trying to get in hyper detail, I have a sort of values-based goal. Like, I want to help make people free in all forms of that word. That's like my big goal. That's not really specific. It doesn't give me a business plan. And then I do the reverse in the near term. Instead of what should I do, I'm constantly trying to ask, what should I not do? What's not a good fit? And the more things I can add to that list of like, not this, then the field of what's possible, it becomes really easy. Well, if it's not on the list of definitely don't do that, then give it a shot. Why not? Right. And like, I find that that's easy. It's more like chiseling a sculpture than painting a picture. It's like, just remove the parts that don't belong, and then you kind of see what's left, and it sort of comes into focus into something really interesting and different than you expected.
Well, and now that you say that, it unlocks something that I'll call a qualification to what I said before. In the first decade of building Libertas and all these things, I didn't have this grand vision, and it has been incremental. But as I've gone forward, that vision has started to like come into greater focus, right? Where even like literally last fall, here's the problem that we ran into. We were a state-based think tank, and then, we also started expanding that policy work nationally. So we would run into like donors or people that are like, wait a minute, you're a think tank that started publishing children's books, and now my grandkid launched a business at your kids market. Who are you? Like, what do you do? What is this? And we were running into this friction because the projects were sitting underneath Libertas Institute, which was the original like parent of these projects. So that led to a whole strategic thinking process, the end result of which is that we rebranded in the fall as Libertas Network, which is kind of like a holding company over all of these different synergistic sister entities. And I share all that because as I've been able to become even clearer with that vision that I've stumbled into and incrementally built along the way, as of last fall, I now have a crystal clear vision, because even though I'll find adjacent opportunities along the way, I know the end result. We are trying to reach and teach and engage 100 million families in the United States of America to learn about and take action on the ideas of freedom. And so now that I have that clear goal, like you're saying, I can reverse engineer and be clear about what I should say no to, but also the opportunities within that domain that I should pursue. I'll end with this. There's a fascinating book written by a guy who's become a friend. His name's Ben Hardy. The book is called Be Your Future Self Now. In psychology, the concept of the future self is essentially what we're talking about. Can you envision through meditation or brainstorming or strategic thinking, try to envision your future self 10 years from now, 30 years from now? Think of I'll use Mr. Beast as an example, which Ben uses in this book. When Jimmy started doing his videos, he recorded videos to his future self, a year ahead, 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, stuff like that. And he scheduled them in YouTube to automatically publish a year in the future. It was like writing a letter to his future self. And so then when the 1 year video came released, it shows a younger, more immature Jimmy. And he's like, man, in a year from now, I hope I have 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. And, and he's trying to envision what it's like in a year. And then the funny thing is when a year comes by and then that video gets automatically published, at that point, he was at like 150,000 subscribers. And so I think the 5 or the 10 year, I don't remember which, is soon going to be, and again, he didn't have the vision at the time. It was this small little vision for what's become. But when you do that future self thinking, when you try to communicate with your future self, I think this is especially good for kids. Again, beginning with the end in mind. What do I want as an adult? What do I hope for myself in the future? And therefore, what should I be doing now that is going to set my future self up for success? As parents, we know that our kids, especially our teenagers, are so focused often on instant gratification, and they get myopic in their decision making, and they fail to contemplate the long-term implications of their actions. But when you do this future self-thinking, even just some journaling or conversation with your kids, you can help them understand that the decisions you make now are either helping or hurting your future self. So what can we be doing now? Whether that's saving and investing, it could be exercise, it could be studying, whatever it is, let's begin with that end in mind and then start making those parental and educational decisions that are going to set your future self up for massive success.
That's so good. I'm gonna try to do something here that we may find out that this is awkward, but I think there's something to it. So stick with me. As we were discussing kind of your three-pronged approach to trying to change really the world, but big changes help inspire lots and lots of people, which is sort of, the policy environment, helping spur entrepreneurial action, and then telling better story. I'm thinking of that is actually a really nice model, parents on an individual family level to think through. Like if I want my kids to be successful and happy and responsible adults, you can control the structure you bring them up in, what kind of family rules and norms and things you have, what kind of freedom is and isn't allowed. So that kind of like structure or policy environment of the family. You can impact the stories that you are telling them, both explicitly in terms of like the books they read and things like that, but also the story of your own life. They're watching you live as an example, and that story that they're observing is going to inform their idea of what's possible, what's right. And then third, the sort of entrepreneurial component, helping them to actually do things, helping them try that lemonade stand, helping them launch that business or create that book or whatever. And I think that's actually a really nice way to think about your child's education is not just like textbooks and classes. It's kind of those three things. What structures and environments are they in? Which is why, to your point, like the unwritten curriculum of a public school is it's teaching you implicitly that you need to ask permission to go to the bathroom, right? That's like a rule set, a structure. So what structure are your kids growing up in? What stories are they seeing? What are they observing and being inspired by and entertained by? And then what experiences are they having? What kind of things are they trying and testing out for themselves? That's just like kind of came to me as we were talking. You tell me, is that a framework that you think we can work with?
It's not at all awkward, I think was the word you chose. No, that resonates a lot with me. And where I love it, why I love it is I think there's a lot of parents who certainly have good intentions and they love their kids, but because they're not being intentional, they're just kind of going through the motions and reacting to the environment around them. They often struggle to, I guess, just to be intentional. Here's where I'm getting at with the Tuttle Twins, for example. One of the biggest observations that we've had over the last years or however long we've been doing it for 11 years. The biggest observation I've had is that our core customer is a parent who already believes the things that are in our books. They believe in merit and free speech and entrepreneurship and critical thinking and all of that. They believe those things. They just have felt disempowered in talking to their kids about those ideas because they believe these ideas, the parents, at I'll call it a conceptual or superficial level, but because they were not educated themselves in a way that got them, to be very literate in and focused on these ideas, they can't communicate. They don't have a language with which to talk to their kids about these ideas over a dinner table discussion or, hey, this current event that's happening, let's talk about it in this context and have it be a learning experience. So the Tuttle Twins, frankly, has become for this core customer almost like a crutch to support them. Scaffolding is perhaps a better mental model, where we can come up alongside them and say, here's the structure and here's the stories and here's even some engagement opportunities to get your family start to do things. But it's on you. We want to empower you. You feel disempowered right now because you have these generic goals and desires, but you haven't really had a system or a process or actual material to kind of help you take those steps forward with your family. But now you can. Let's create that scaffolding so that we can then build that structure, put the good stories on inside of it, and then your family, once maybe inside that structure, you're incubated and you're indoctrinated, we might say, you're really informed, then you can leave the structure and, be independent enough to then go forth and spread the ideas or build whatever you want to build.
Yeah. The story component. I remember when your first Tuttle Twins book came out, because we were in parallel places. I was working at a think tank, you're running the Libertas, and that a children's book. Well, that's kind of an interesting, surprising thing. And then, but I had kids as well, young kids. And I was one of the earliest customers of the first book and I bought probably most of them, although I don't know if I'm keeping up now. But when I had the realization of the way that the stories that our kids are surrounded by and the stories that they hear and internalize, it's not the same kind of learning as like a textbook or a class. So for example, if my kids have read some Tuttle Twins or I've read them to them, it's not like if I gave them a test on monetary policy, they would suddenly pass it, because they're not necessarily consciously making those really explicit connections. But here's what does happen. We go to the store and my wife says something like, oh my gosh, eggs have gotten so expensive. And instead of having an instinctive reaction, which is easy for many people to have, of well, businesses must be greedy, therefore bad. And this is kind of like a self-defeating, pessimistic mindset of oh, so businesses trying to make money is bad for the world, right? That kind of creeps in.
Sure.
And of course, businesses can be bad, but if you have that mindset that trying to sell a product for the most you can get for it is inherently evil and destroys things in the world, that's a very negative thing. It's very subtle. But because my kids had read and been exposed to the Tuttle Twins, they didn't consciously connect it to the Tuttle Twins, but I heard them say, oh, so government must be creating more money, right? Just to have that little bit of that piece in your mental toolkit. That's something that you don't encounter in the world naturally these days. And to have been introduced with stories like that, to see oh, in this microcosm of this Tuttle Twin story, or maybe even the, what's that book? How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, Peter Schiff. It's the Robinson Crusoe island where they're trading fish and all this stuff. That framework, those frameworks are there. And we appeal to them implicitly or subconsciously when we encounter things in the world. That is such a different starting point for a kid than either, well, I don't understand why prices go up. It just makes no sense. The world is incomprehensible. Or, yeah, things go up because businesses are bad, right? To have something more there to work with is so important.
Here's what I'll interpret what you're saying, Isaac, for the parents listening. The model that I use, especially with I speak at a lot of homeschool conferences, so I usually share this in that context. But what I like to say is that context has to precede content. And the problem with the textbook format of learning is that it's cramming content into the minds of children who typically just do a pump and dump where they just fill their minds with the factoids, they take the test, and then, right? Because it's not relevant to them. It's not meaningful information. It hasn't stuck. But if information has context, if the content has context, which storytelling gives because you're placing it in context of a story. By the way, there's amazing neurological research behind how our brains are wired for storytelling, why humans are so receptive to information when packaged in stories. And so when you're using a story to provide the context and show how that content, how that idea plays out, how it makes sense, suddenly it sticks, where your kids, without even thinking about Tuttle Twins, can make that connection later on. I think that's what parents want for their kids. They want them learning stuff that is going to empower them in our lives. To me, that then makes us more intentional to say, are my children learning ideas and information that is presented in a way that has context to their lives? Is the schooling model that we've chosen, is their pedagogy set up in such a way that my kids are going to feel a connection to the information, or are they just passive recipients of, factoids that their teacher is pushing upon them? When we educate our children, even if it's supplementing at home, if your school isn't doing it or whatever, but when we educate our children, I wrote a book called Passion Driven Education where I talk about this model at length. When we educate our children, context And the best context we can have is the stuff that they're curious about. If your kids are interested in Minecraft, build a whole educational curriculum around Minecraft. It's easier than you think, and it will be far more successful than you can imagine. Why? Because you're helping your kids lean into what they're already interested in. You're speaking to them in a language that not only do they understand, but they passionately speak themselves, that they're very fluent in. And so when we take the content, but we package it with context, man, comprehension goes through the roof, retention goes through the roof. And then you have those light bulb moments like your kids are having, where suddenly they're understanding the world around them because the information stuck with them in a way that was more resonant than what they would have gotten if it was in textbook, classroom, worksheet type of format.
Oh man, that content without context is such a key point. And I think about my 15-year-old is, working on, she's getting her permit for driving. Imagine if someone had never been a passenger in a car, ever, never ridden in a car, but they study and take the driver's test and they pass the written test. What do you do when you come to a stoplight or a four-way stop? And they memorize and get all that right, versus someone who rides as a passenger in their parents' car for 15 years, drives in the parking lot from time to time, plays around, has a golf cart maybe. Which one do you think is going to be a better driver? And you just think about like that context of being around and seeing, even if you're not ready to do it yourself, seeing it be done, how that informs us. And the traditional, think about that with careers, right? Like being around the kind of jobs that you might have or start off with and seeing them before you do them and dabbling in them. The typical education traditional approach right now, really the only career you are getting context for is being a teacher. Yeah. You see what it means to be a teacher. You see what that job looks like. That's the only job you're really around. You're not in the market next to people who are being realtors and lawyers and entrepreneurs. You're just seeing the teaching profession. That's pretty much it, which is why a lot of the people who tend to do really well in school and like it go on to work in education, right? Because it's an apprenticeship for being a teacher or a professor in many ways. So I love that, just putting your kids, and when you just think of it that way, it feels like pressure sometimes, but it helps relieve pressure when you realize I don't need to have all the content that I need to impart to my kids, but can I put them in contexts where they learn and absorb it? And even in your own career, there are ways to bring your kid with you to work sometimes, or to let them see what you're working on and just let them be around more contexts so that they can start to develop that knowledge.
Let me share one related thing that I think plays well with this. I think there's two different models of how people learn information. One is how the traditional school system works. I call it the just in case model, right? Just in case you're going to become a rocket scientist when you're older, you need to memorize the quadratic equation and like all this stuff now, right? Just in case you become a marine biologist, you need to know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, because the system does not know what all these kids are going to go become later on in their life. So just in case, they need this broad base of memorization of all this stuff to set them up for success, just in case they end up in profession X, Y, or Z. The problem is that's not at all how humans learn. It's not how we as adults learn. The just in case model is this artificial experiment in the modern schooling environment. The way we all learn, I think, is what I call the just in time model. Right? When your refrigerator breaks down, at no point do you say, gee, I'm so glad that 11 years ago when we bought this thing, I read the instruction manual cover to cover, just in case this outcome. Of course not, right? Just in time for when you need to fix it, you're getting out the instruction manual. You're pulling up the YouTube video. You're calling Uncle Bob, who's super handy, right? You're calling the manufacturer. Just in time for when you need certain information, you know how to access the resources, how to interpret and contextualize the information you're learning, and how to take action on it. My gosh, if we focus just on that with our kids, not cramming their minds full of information, not bombarding them with all these factoids, but just helping them learn where to acquire information, which frankly with AI is like unspeakably easy now, but like, where to find information, how to contextualize and interpret it, and then how to take action on it, we will set our kids up for so much more success. Frankly, in the age of AI, they don't need to be repositories of information is what I was trying to think. They don't need to know all this stuff. We need to empower our kids to be able to be actors of information and resources that they assemble and compile on their own. That's what we as adults do, right? We have a job, we have a task, we have a desire, a hobby, whatever it is. And then just in time for that goal that we have, or that requirement that is put upon us by our boss, we then go figure it out, assemble that information, resources, and then we act. We need to educate our kids, I think, in a way that is not artificial, but is conducive to how we as humans learn. That's heavy on storytelling, but it's also this kind of project-based, goal-oriented learning where we just figure out how to assemble what we need and then move forward.
Oh, I love it. Connor, always an inspiration. Any final things you want to share, special stuff you're working on, or resources that parents who are listening to this might want to check out?
Nothing comes to mind. TuttleTwins.com. If you want the books, we've talked about those a bit. Kidsmarkets.com is where you can find the children's entrepreneur market. You can learn about everything we're doing at libertas.org. We're easy to find on social media, and just trying to rally all those who think that they share in this vision of trying to save the world by saving the kids.
I'll put in a plug for Praxis, a company that I started 12 years ago, and now it is part of the Libertas network. If you have kids that are on that edge, they're transitioning out of high school and they're maybe considering something other than college, they're looking at the debt, they're not really sure it's worth it, really is an amazing program giving real world experience and a portfolio of skills. So I would check out discoverpraxis.com. It's I obviously I'm biased, but it's an amazing way for a lot of students to go. And we have several Praxians that work for us at OpenEd. So Connor, thank you so much,
Love it.
man. Keep up the good work.
Likewise. Thanks, Isaac.